back in the day when these were in person, it was a bit easier to know what to wear. But essentially, you should be wearing something that you would be at least appropriate for the clinical environment. And if you want to dress a bit more formally because that makes you feel confident, I think that's absolutely fine. Then turn up is about getting there on time and being ready. So that's slightly different in the world of online interviews. You may not have to travel anywhere, but I think you need to think about where in your house you're going to be doing the interviews. Is the Wi-Fi connection good? Are you going to be left alone? Is it sufficiently quiet? And having a dry run of it is a good idea. And maybe if you're doing practice interviews with friends, doing it through a computer so that you feel ready to do that. And similarly, turn up in the right frame of mind. Make sure you've eaten. Make sure you've got a glass of water with you. Make sure you're there early, and that you have settled in and feel comfortable and ready. And then the third bit, shut up, is probably slightly counterintuitive, but this is about how when you're giving a response in interviews, you want to come to a conclusion. So I think we're all aware that this format is time limited, and I think everyone has lots of interesting things to say about their CV, or if it's a clinical scenario, there's different avenues you can go down. But being able to come to a conclusion and concisely end a statement with a summary will give you a much better chance of conveying to the interviewers whatever point you're trying to make. And that's because of something called the primacy and recency effect. We tend to remember the first thing people say and the last thing. And so making sure that you say a good first thing and a good last thing and the bit in the middle sounds good will make sure that you're more likely to score highly. So this is just a reminder about it being an online interview. So make sure you're happy with whichever computer you're using and make sure you've tried that before. So how can we structure our answers so that we are able to shut up, as it were? Well, there's lots of different formats that we can take for them. There's a few down the bottom here that you might have come across. For instance, CAMP is a way of thinking about reviewing one's CV. What are your clinical accolades? What have you done in academic? What have you done in management? What have you done in personal? SPIES is one about if you've got a difficult communication situation between colleagues. And then STAR is thinking if someone asks you tell me about a time that you did something and how that reflects. And that's thinking about the situation. What task did you undertake? What was the action that led to? What results did that mean for you and the patient or you and the department? And what's your reflection on that? What skills did you learn? What did you do? And they're all good. I think you have to think which ones work for you. And I think you have to try and look for a happy medium. Nobody would like to hear a response to a question that has no structure, is quite garbled, but also it can be quite difficult as an interviewer to get a response that feels like it's come from ChatGPT because it's so stuck into headings of a particular framework. If you're still in the process of reading around, there's lots of good stuff out there. The BMJ has some interview tips that are available. This book is one that's quite commonly in hospital libraries. It's aimed at all specialties, but talks about structuring answers and talks about some practicality of interviews. So it's one that might be helpful. And there's lots of other sessions like this one that have been done and recorded over the years. So do head to YouTube and see what other educational groups have done, because they are out there. So my structure I like to have for answers is a bit more simple. And again, it's 3 stages. And it's tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. So if you're given your question, say it's your clinical question, and they say something like, oh, you're asked to go and see a floppy infant on the postnatal ward, how would you approach this clinical situation? You probably think, oh, I've got lots of stuff to say about that. I know lots of things about floppy infants. Maybe you've helped write the pathway in your department. Maybe you've got a case you can think about. Take a second, take a breath, and decide what you're going to tell them. So you could say, I would approach a floppy infant thinking about their immediate stabilization and management, their initial workup, and then their ongoing diagnostics. So you've given the interviewers a framework that you're going to go through. Then you also know in your own head, okay, I'm talking for the next 5 minutes. I might get lost. Well, I know what I'm doing. I'm doing initial management, workup, and extended diagnostics. Then you tell them, so you can chat about, how you do your initial A to E, how you'd focus on something like their sugar and ensure they don't need any respiratory support. And then once they're stable, you can go on to what you do in your workup. And then you can talk about the more complicated investigations. You can talk about the family, and that stuff will come naturally as you go through. And you'll probably think of stuff during that phase, but you've got a structure that you can come back to if you get a bit lost. And then keeping an eye on the time, you come to the final bit and you go, so to conclude, I've talked about how I'd manage a floppy infant, talking about their initial management, their initial workup and their diagnostics. And you come to a nice conclusion on that. And they know that's the end of your answer. And then if you've got a bit of extra time, they can tell you if they're ready to go to the next one, you'll go on to the next question. But it makes it look like you've got a structure in both thinking and talking. And then my next tip is that it's useful to know your CV. So you are in this interview to help the interviewers know why you're a good candidate. I know the white space questions have been shorter this year, so you might not have had as great a chance to show them, the interviewers, how great you are. So know what you're going to try and tell them. Know what your strengths are. Know what your big projects you want to get in there are, and know why it is you want to do neonates. And if you've got those 3 things in your back pocket, whatever answer you're doing, you can mold to be able to reflect those. And so, everyone who's been shortlisted, you're eligible to be in the program. And so it's your job to show the interviewers that that should be you rather than everyone else interviewing. And so it's your job to try and secure a place in the program. And to do that, other things that I always think are important interview skills are, be peer confident. So dress up well, sit confidently, and use confident language. So and the heuristics I use for that are to speak like you're getting married. Say I do and I will, not I might or I try. And when they ask you about, what attributes do you have that would make you suitable for this, don't say I think I am good at things. You say I am good at X, Y, Z. And that helps you sound like a reasonable and appointable candidate. And most of all, good luck, because I'm sure that all of you are going to do brilliantly in your interviews. Fab. Any questions?
Perfect. Thank you, Tommy, so much. I will be coordinating the chat, so if everyone has any questions and you're too shy to ask, you can just pop it in the chat and I'll be asking the speakers. I've also added a link on the chat as you people log in. The agenda is there, my PowerPoint is there. I can upload everybody's PowerPoints there as well, and some practice questions for the final bit of our session today. Good. Any other questions? And if not, Tommy, would you like to introduce our next speaker?
Well, if there are no questions, we'll move on to Sarah's talk. So Sarah is one of my colleagues down here in the Southwest. I know that she did better than me in interviews. That's all I'll put it as. But she's going to chat to us a bit further about the interview process, preparing, and what you can do to get yourself ready and how to approach them.
Thanks, Tommy. I'll just start sharing my slides now. So hi everybody. My name's Sarah. I'm one of the trainees down in the southwest. I'm currently in the transport team in the southwest, but I do a lot of working in Bristol essentially. I did do okay at interview. And the reason I tell you that is not because I think I'm special, but because I hope that some of the things that I will share with you will make you feel a lot more confident going into it. Because I think I essentially use structure and resources to give me that confidence to go forward. And I think that's what won for me in terms of pacing myself. I can't see a lot of stuff, but if anybody has a question, I'm sure the others are watching, just like put your hand up or interrupt me at any point, but otherwise I'll just go through it. So I'm going to go through some resources that I use, which are based on both interview preparation, some of which we've seen through Tommy's stuff as well, but we'll just reiterate it. And there's links to these things, and then some clinical resources to use as well, in case you're just feeling a bit flustered by the different categories of the questions, which I think Paul is going to go through afterwards. A little bit about time management and how to prep yourself in the actual interview, and then some common pitfalls and how to avoid them. Being here is probably one of the best things that you can do, because you're already thinking about it. You're going to get lots of resources, but you might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed by what we're saying, a little bit foggy. You're going to be able to come back to this, and all of my slides all have links in them, so you don't need to take anything down now. You can come back and get it. And I'm hoping to give you some stuff which beats your imposter. I think most of us, despite getting all the way into medical school, into foundation, through medical school, and then into peds training, we're now trying to get into a neonatal post. We always feel like we're not quite good enough. And that's probably our A-type personalities. But we are good enough. We've got into the interview. We just need to be able to sell ourselves. Tommy's already showed you this book. I think probably most of us have seen this throughout our careers already, and probably when we were going into pediatric training. But it's a great book. It's a great structured book by Olivia Pickard, and I just wanted to bring that up again. I won't go through the different structures, but if you haven't seen that, I definitely recommend trying to get hold of it. You can probably get it on Vinted for a couple of pounds, and yeah, it just gives you a really good structure of things and where to start. I know you probably don't feel like you've got a lot of time, but you do. There is still time to get yourselves into good structure mode, because it is about structure. That being said, there are some other really, really great resources. Now, Tessa Davies, some of you might have seen her because she does a lot of stuff with the Royal College. She's a pediatric emergency medical consultant. She's Scottish, she speaks fantastically, and she has developed this whole course. You don't have to get onto her course or do her course. It's very much focused at consultant staff, but she's got some great resources on any format that you like to look at. But YouTube is where I tend to go to her, and it will talk about structure, some wild questions, and how to really sell yourself. She's gone a bit beyond the camp structure that we're used to when you're selling yourself, and talks about your passions and stuff first. And it might just be a way in which you want to use your CV to do yourself justice in a different kind of way and come across uniquely. And she talks about unique selling points rather than what your strengths are, and having sort of 3 that you can bring forward to any question. So she's a really great resource. And if you click on the Getting It Right at the top here, it would take you to her YouTube channel. Like Tommy has already said, it is really important to think about how you are presenting yourself and how you dress professionally, and making sure it's a distraction-free zone when you're on the computer. But another thing that I think is really important, I'm possibly not doing it right now as I'm presenting to you, but it's talking about cadence and pace and clarity, because that's what you're going to need to be able to do in the interview to essentially bring the attention to what you're saying. If you just speak 100 miles per hour through your CV because you want to get all 4 of the camp structures in, they're all absolute experts on the CSAC panel, and I'm sure like tune in and listen, but it is going to be difficult for them to keep to hearing your unique selling points. This guy, Vin Giang, he's basically a professional speaking coach. He has lots of different resources on his Instagram and YouTube as well, but he talks about how to really get your cadence and use your voice as a way to drag attention. Because when you're in an interview, I don't know if you can see me at the moment, hopefully you can, we use a lot of hand gestures. Now, sometimes that can be really important to get the point in. Sometimes it can be very distracting, and I don't want you to get too obsessed about how you are, because you're not going to be able to change everything in 2 weeks. But he has some really good points on how to think about yourself beforehand. And I imagine many people, because I did, will rehearse a lot about how to sell your CV in particular. And you may use a lot of ums and ahs and all the rest of it. This video that I've got on here, I'm not going to play now because I don't think I've really got enough time. It's just a couple of minutes, but it talks through how to essentially assess yourself early. So you can record yourself on video, turn it upside down, play it, and just listen to yourself without seeing yourself. Then watch it with the voice turned off so that you can see what your body language does, and then turn it all over, turn it all off, and just write down what you've written. So you transcribe and see where all of your pitfalls are. It's quite a difficult thing to do because you're putting yourself in a vulnerable position. You'll probably feel a bit vulnerable later on in the second session, but you're meant to feel vulnerable, right? We're putting ourselves out there. That makes us feel like imposters because we're being challenged. But these are good things to do, and it will make you more confident before the interview. I will say I didn't do that before the interview, but I do think it will help, and I will do it before my consultant one. He has other ideas about how to speak clearer, and also how to listen to questions and what structures to use. So if you can't always remember SPIES and STARS and CAMP and PERM and all of the other ones, he has a very simple structure, which is 3-2-1. So name 3 things, hone in on 2, and then conclude on 1. And go through his resources, but they might help you to stop rambling and to keep it really, really clear, because honing in on what you're trying to conclude is what they're going to hear, that primacy and recency that Tommy was speaking about. I was just out to brunch with one of my colleagues, and she said, "Oh, are you going to tell them about the power pose?" I told one consultant that before he went into interview, and I saw him walk in as a superhero. And you guys may have seen the YouTube TED Talk by Amy Cuddy, where she essentially stands like Wonder Woman, but she's done lots and lots of research on body language. You stand like Wonder Woman for 10-15 minutes before you go into that interview, and you will come across a lot more confident, a lot stronger. I try to do this before I even go on a ward round, actually, but it's a good thing to do, and it might seem silly, but I almost think that these resources for you guys are much more important than looking through thousands of hundreds of clinical resources, because these are the things that are going to sell you across a computer. There's lots of other body language expert stuff out there, a lot on Diary of a CAO, and some from FBI agents. So I would recommend having a look at that sort of stuff. Clinical resources. Okay, take your head out of being in the interview and feeling worried. Clinical resources. Neonatal syllabus is out there for us to have a look at. Now, I'm not going to go through the different structures of the questions. Paul will touch on this. I would not expect them for you to know the whole neonatal syllabus and all the expert points on all of those things. They do not expect you to be a neonatologist at this point, but having an idea of the sort of things that we look at might be helpful for you to feel confident, and it's there on the Royal College. This is the link. Key resources that I had a look at pre-interview was from the BAPM website. At the top here, this clinical link will take you through to it, and there's national updates there. So it's about their 3-year delivery plan, reading the signals, which is looking a lot at the safety reviews and the report incident investigations that are happening. And then other specialty reports like the Getting It Right First Time. I think if you have some idea of the things that are happening in the neonatal world, that will help you, particularly around the governance questions and how people quality assure and outcome assess. So I wanted to highlight those to you. I don't think you need to know these word for word or back to front, but being aware of all the reports that are happening. I mean, it's all over the news. I think probably people are aware that just last year there's another big I don't think it's necessarily MNSI at the moment that's called, but it's the National Maternity and Neonatal Investigation that's run by Baroness Valerie Amos. So that is out there, and just having aware of these things might help you refer to things, but it's not absolutely necessary. There's bonus clinical information. So I like to, if I can, in any interview, refer to frameworks. So I will give them my clinical plan. I've had, again, a couple of interviews to do fellowships as well. And then I will refer to how I might make change or quality improve the work that is being done on the unit by using a framework. And BAPAM has great ones. And being aware, particularly of the preterm one that BAPAM have done, is probably really important, but there's some other amazing ones that have come out around shared decision making with parents, and then pain has been a new one. So I think having a look at some of those things that you can draw upon will be really helpful. There are other reports out there. Knowing what the National Neonatal Audit Programme is, again, I wouldn't necessarily expect you to know this before you're a neonatal trainee, but there are some things that can help you. And some of these pictures are all linked to take you through those if you want to have a look through. And some of the charity and NHS directions of care, saving babies' lives resources, will be helpful too. Everything I'm saying probably feels a little bit overwhelming, and this chart will probably make you feel a bit overwhelmed too. But this is what NNAP looks at, is all of the way that they outcome measure and compare how the units throughout the nation are doing. But if you hone in on something, so if you're interested in infection and you've done some work in infection, this here is a page for you to have some other resources to then talk about and enhance what you're saying. Some of it's based on research, clinical guidelines, parent and public engagement, audits, that sort of stuff. And I just will hone you in on one. So parental partnerships. These are some of the charters that have been written and other resources that you can look at if you are interested. Again, this is not to overwhelm you, but it's to just, if you have done any work, so I had done a lot of work in safety of lines, I was then able to use some of this stuff and these other toolkits to enhance my answers. And I think it gives you bonus points. If you're not aware of what the neonatal networks are, this is just a link to understanding how we run throughout the nation, and what the specs of the neonatal networks are. And again, it's just so you have a deeper understanding, so you feel confident. Again, I don't think you need to know all of their aims and their sort of key performance indicators, but I do think it's helpful to have an idea of how we work on neonatal level. When it comes to research, I don't know whether what you'll get asked. Obviously, I don't know what you'll get asked, but I did have a look at some research and some papers, so that I felt like if they asked me what recent paper that I had read, I would have a good sort of response to that. And I'm sure that people are reading papers and have doing journal clubs, but some other good resources if you just want to touch on stuff, engage. I'm just going to share with you now. So this is Keith Barrington's neonatal research page. He reviews all the hot topics in neonatal research, and he does a really, really good analysis. It's very, very interesting, and it's a great website to have a look at, both for interview and in future life. I also listen to the Incubator podcast. They do journal club shorts that are just very interesting. They're really brief analyses. And the ADC has a podcast as well. Fetal neonatal phantoms is not that frequent. It used to be a little bit more frequent. I think the last one was actually in February last year, but it will review all the latest papers that are out there and give it a stance from a UK point of view. I think it's a good thing to have a listen to. I will just go through a couple of extra things. So time management, I think you'll probably get a bit of experience this in a second. This is my experience from my interview, which was 4 or 5 years ago. But there will be 4 stations. The whole interview is about 30 minutes long. I can get corrected by people in a second if I'm wrong. And they will be single or 2-part questions. Now, at the beginning on that first section, or whichever section you're on, they should let you know the 2 questions in a row. I'm pretty sure I remember this correctly. My very first one, I got asked a question for the sort of bit about myself, and then about 3 minutes in, I got asked another question. I didn't know it was coming, so I got cut cut off and interrupted, and I had to start onto a new line of thought. So just be aware that might happen. I don't think it should anymore, but it might happen. And I would prepare 5 minutes per station, even though the whole interview is 30 minutes. And if you can, I would prepare it even less and go slow, because you will rush through things just because of adrenaline. Break your 5 minutes down. I think I've gone through most of this stuff, but practice your pace. I think that is the key thing. Film yourself if you're confident enough to do that and have a listen. Have your structure like we've been saying, and keep it really simple. 3 points, 3, 3, 3, threes, only thinking threes. I don't think going beyond that is worth it. And I would say keep everything authentic. Obviously, never say anything that's not true, an experience that you've been through, but I would also be really authentic to yourself, because that will drive your passion. And I'll tell you a couple of my core values in a second that kind of help me empower like what I think are my strengths and my unique selling points. And the other thing I said to a couple of my colleagues who also did very well last year, I try to go into an interview forgetting who's on the other side of the panel, thinking as if they're almost medical students or if they're parents. It's a real situation. What would I actually do if I was the registrar on, or like I'm talking to a friend? And I think if you can somehow mentally put yourself in that position, you will calm yourself and you'll think as if you're in business mode. I've just got 2 more minutes and then I will pass on to the next people. So common pitfalls of interviews. Failure to listen to the question. You will be in probably over practice mode of selling your camp structure, but they might well ask you, what makes a good neonatology consultant or a good neonatologist, and somehow you then have to sort of sell yourself in that. But you have to listen to that question, and I think if you don't answer the question, you're not going to score right. So listen to the question, have the structure there, but don't assume that you are just going to get to be able to do camp. You need to be able to bring it in different ways, but you can do that, I promise. Running out of time and mistiming yourself. Try to practice doing things quicker or in less time than you might actually get. If you've got extra time, they did say to me at the end of my very last question, you've got a bit more time. Do you want to talk through any of your other questions or add anything else to anything else? At which point I went, yeah, blah, 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 blah. And I think they all just laughed, basically. Try to be engaging. It is going to be so easy for you to just go into monotone, and you need to try and be the zebra amongst all the horses. Use your cadence, your pace, your enthusiasm, your authenticity to really sell yourself, and speak very clearly across. Not easy, definitely not easy over the computer, but you can do it. And yeah, practice doing that, if anything. When another pitfall, I think, is staying in the previous question. So when you have finished, like I'm sure you guys, you've all been through MRCPCH. When you go from one question to the next, leave that last question behind. Shut that door, don't think about it, and move on to the next one. Try and do that after the interview as well. Try not to think back through it. I can tell you that I cried after my interview, I think for about 30 minutes. Then I went into my long day, to which everybody said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "I'm working long and I'm so upset." And I thought I'd absolutely bombed it, and I didn't. I did well, but I didn't believe that at all. Being inauthentic, I think that will come through. If you're not selling yourself and you're just come up with what you think will be a good answer but isn't true to yourself, I think that will come across. You need true examples and you need to sell what drives you. Use your core values. So I think 2 of my selling points are the fact that I am very focused on kindness in life. I think it's incredibly important, but particularly to staff and psychological safety. So a lot of work that I will do and focus on is a lot around wellness, but essentially I can sell myself in terms of risk at work, moral burden, distress, and getting that all right. And I have a big portfolio on the side of what I've done in that. And my other part of me is I like to be very efficient. My family I think I'm absolutely mad when I'm at the supermarket, but that is how I run my life. I have to just get through the day, but I can switch that into an absolute selling point about how operational and strategic I can be and how I want to improve care through novel strategies. And I've doing a lot of that through ultrasound. So you can find some of your core values, get right back down to who you think you are, and then sell that in why that makes you a good neonatologist. And I think when I talk about those true to me, I can really sell myself across, and it's being authentic. Last one. Being unprepared is probably another really big pitfall. That's not going to happen for any of you because you're all here. But it might make you feel foggy when you're getting asked a question. Take those deep breaths. You do know the knowledge, you will be prepared. And just take a little bit of time in this next couple of weeks to have a look at some of those things that are going to bolster your answers to your questions. So yeah, look at the resources, use your structure, think about how you're going to be engaging, use that cadence in your speech, use your bonus clinical knowledge, and stay authentic. You are definitely not an imposter. You have the right to be there. You can sell yourself. I hope that was helpful. You've totally got this. Any questions?
Tommy, you're on mute.
Yeah, you're mute, Tommy. But I'll let
Sorry,
you speak first.
I was just saying thank you to Sarah, and I think we've got a question from Amrat.
Sarah, thank you for kind and really great into formats. Just one question. Sometimes, like they say, what is your one best selling point? We take you in. So then how we structure, like then this camp structure not followed up. And what particular things like we highlight one of this is one my point. Like these sometimes questions are very tricky to answer. Could you please help us how we
Yeah, I mean, we have a panel of people on here, and some other people might have some other ideas. But if someone was to ask me what's my one unique selling point, the way I would personally answer is I would choose one of the things that I think is core to who I am, and I would explain it a little bit more. So I would say what it is. I would give them examples of how that has been shown, whether it has been something that has pulled out through a case or my MSF or feedback that I've had or positions that I've been able to get into. It kind of depends on what I'm or projects that I've dived into and how I've made change on the unit. And then I would take it into why I think that is a really important thing for getting this job and this neonatal position. Does that make sense, Amrat? Does that answer your question? So it's not just like, oh, I am kind. That kindness means nothing. I am kind and a neonatologist needs to be kind. Like that's not a good answer. But talking about why I'm kind, what that's driven through my work and my projects, and then other feedback that I've had back, and then how that's made me. Does that make sense? How I can then sort of sell myself through that and why it's important as a neonatologist. And I think you can adapt that whatever it is, your strength, into any question that they may ask you. So if it was more about why, what's important to for a neonatologist in partnerships with families, I can use that strength and sell how I have done work within that to kind of improve myself and why that's important for that. Hopefully that's answering your question. I don't know if anybody else wants to come in on that one unique selling point. Paul, I'm sure, has got lots of information there.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that absolutely, Sarah. I think it's really unlikely you'll get asked that question. It would be really quite a difficult question. You will almost certainly get asked why you want to be a neonatologist, but that's a slightly different question. But I think Sarah's right. If you can answer it from something which is true to yourself, but explain how that impacts on how you work and how you think and how you are. I think that would be a good structure to the question. And, the reason to come on a course like this today is we'll give you some thoughts about what you can do in the intervening weeks, about how you can ask yourself some questions and how you can ask your friends some questions, and just have a little bit of a practice.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I agree with you guys, and I understand your concern, Amrat. What I would use like as a trick to that question where they ask you for one thing, is still find your one thing, and then you can use your CAM structure to explain why this one thing is applicable. For example, I'll tell you what I just thought about myself now. For example, I would say that my unique selling point is that I have a healthcare MBA. So then I would link it back to why is a healthcare MBA important in clinical? Why is an MBA important in academic? Why is it important in leadership and management? And why is it important in personal? So you can still have one example, but use your CAM structure to actually link it back to explain why does that make you stand out. Yeah, I hope this helps you.
Thank you.
Fabulous. I think we're about to move on with the timetable. So unfortunately, we're come back. I won't have time to ask Sarah what her tricks are to be efficient in the supermarket, because I'm always told off by my family for being very pernickety about how we pack things, so I can unpack it correctly at the other end. But we've got Paul talking to us next. So Paul is a consultant who's recently retired from clinical practice and is working for MSI, but previously was part of the neonatal CSAC. For those of you who may not know, CSAC in subspecialty is the group who is responsible for your training within the subspecialty and your progression. And he's also got extensive experience of being an interviewer for the neonatal grid. So I'm sure he's going to provide us with some very useful insights. So I'll hand over to Paul.
Thanks, Tommy. Yes, so welcome everyone. So as Tommy said, I was a member of CSAC for the last 12 or so years, and the interview process changed quite a lot over that time, and particularly the move to online. So it's been a learning curve for the interviewers as much as it is for the interviewees. So I was pleased that they thought they'd ask some old duffer for some ideas about how grid interviews do. And if you were a bit bored with what I said, I've actually put little pictures behind each of my slides, which are something of me and things I've been doing in the last year. So first thing, that you're going to get basically asked 4 questions. I think that the way in which it's now structured is you will go into a clinical room online, and the panel will be in front of you, and they between them will cover over these 4 topics, and these will be about your motivation for the specialty and some of your past achievements, something of a clinical nature, something of a leadership nature, and something of an academic nature. Now, over the last few years, the motivation question and the academic question are set by the College Pediatric and Child Health and not by the Neonatal CSAC, whereas the other 2 tend to be set by the Neonatal CSAC and are much more relevant to neonatology, should I say. And I'll go through each of those different topics in turn with just some thoughts. But perhaps quite useful for you is to know that this is how we score. So each person in the panel is scoring you for every question that you get asked, and they're scoring you on a scale of 1 to 5, and you want to be scoring 3. 4 or 5 is better, but you want to be scoring 3. And the way in which we structure the questions when the questions are being prepared is we devise a stem of a question. What is your motivation to be a neonatologist? And then we have a model answer. And we recognize that very few people will give the model answer, but there are certain things and phrases and terms that we would quite like to hear people mention within that. And there are some things that we absolutely wouldn't want to hear you saying. I want to be a neonatologist because I really like babies. Doesn't really cut it in the world of a tertiary level neonatologist. But talking about some experience that you've had, some influence that you've had, would be the type of things we want to do. But just when the the assessors are listening to your answers, we've got some sort of preset ideas of what we want to hear, and we're looking for those positive and negative indicators. It's rare that people score 1s and 2s in this interview process by the very nature that you're sitting in front of us. And I think this is what Tommy and Sarah have been saying. You know, you've got to this point on your merit, and you have to have the self-belief that you're good enough to do it. So, as I say, that panel is usually of 4 people. Some will be from the neonatal CSAC, and some will be neonatologists from district general hospitals, and some will be paediatricians. As I say, the 4 people on the panel will ask each of those questions, but everyone is scoring looking at those positive and negative indicators. One person will introduce the first question and sort of be the spokesperson for the panel, and the person asking the 4th question, will finish and say that is the end. Now, one of the things that actually we find quite difficult is if I were talking to you, teaching you, asking you some questions, and you were giving me answers that I thought, yeah, that's a really good answer, I'd be making appropriately nodding noises, nodding and, you know, saying, yeah, that's good, keep going, you know, blah, blah, blah. In an interview, we're not going to do any of that. You're not going to be able to tell from what the panel's face is saying whether you are or aren't answering that question well. So just to be aware of that. There's going to be no encouraging or discouraging noises going on. They may also be trying to take some notes, because one of the things that we have to do is to give feedback to the candidates on how they answered that question. So you might sometimes see them looking down and not looking straight at you. And I think in terms of where you should look, you should probably pay your attention to the person who is asking that question with a little bit of movement of your head to look at the other people on the panel, but mainly focusing on the person who's asked them the question. Now, some of you might know the people who are interviewing you. And that can be really, really disconcerting, because you think, well, why are they asking me that question? They sort of already know what my view is on that. So don't be put off if someone you know is sitting on the other side of the panel. But what you have to be aware of is the panel have absolutely no other information about you whatsoever. We do not have your application forms. We don't have a copy of your CV. We know absolutely nothing about you other than you scored highly enough in the application process to be called to interview. And so we can only make our decision about how well or other you've performed by what you actually tell us in answer to that question. So to me, this is the easiest of all of the questions that you're going to get asked, and this will be the same at the end of this process when you're applying for consultant posts. If I was a college representative on any consultant interview panels, I would always be saying, tell us why you applied for this job and why you're the best person for it. And if someone couldn't answer that question, I would tell the local team I wouldn't appoint them. If they can't sell themselves, then no point. And this is the start of that process. So this is not about being arrogant, but this is talking about why it is you're motivated. I've sat in one of these interviews many years ago, and the girl who we were interviewing, when asked, what's your motivation, you know, what's influenced your decision making, she pointed across the table to me and said, he was my consultant many years ago and I was impressed by what he did. And I'm sure lots of you will be in a situation where you've been motivated to get to this point by people who you've worked with. So we want to know why it is that you want to do neonatology, and then what is it that you've done so far that showed some motivation to that. So some of the quality improvement stuff that you might have done, some of the guideline reviews that you might have done, being part of particular teams involved in neonatology. But we also want to know that you've given it some thought, because you know, this is going to be your life, and we want to make sure that you've understood what it means to be a consultant in neonatology. It's very different being a consultant neonatologist from being a consultant dermatologist. There are specific challenges within subspecialty training and knowledge. We want to recognise that you understand some of those things. And Sarah alluded to the syllabus. So having an idea about what that syllabus talks about is helpful, but you certainly don't know to know it in depth. You need to explain that you've understood about the breadth of the work that you do. So, it's from antenatal to postnatal and beyond, and recognizing that it's not just doing all the sexy technical stuff on the unit of intubating and putting in lines and the like. And it does carry an emotional toll. I think all aspects of medicine do, but recognition of that and the importance of kindness within your team that Sarah alluded to, and kindness to yourself. And then there are some practical things about understanding how neonatal networks are, understanding what the links are to the British Association of Perinatal Medicine and the really helpful guidance sheets that they produce, and the other things that Tommy and Sarah have already spoken about. So the motivation will normally be your first question, and we usually put it as your first question because it's the one you should be most prepared to be able to answer, which hopefully will calm you down a little bit so that you get your speech working correctly. If I think about the clinical questions, I mean, neonatology is enormous, isn't it? We could ask you absolutely anything, but it's about testing your clinical ability and reasoning, and we don't want to make these things very, very complicated. So the best thing that I can say is to try and put yourself in that scenario, because it's very likely that the question that we've asked is a scenario that you will have been in. And if you're talking to it from a position of truth that you've been through, then that's much easier to try and guide your way through it. Some people sometimes say, do you mind if I just write a few notes down? And I don't think that anyone has an issue with that, just to help remember what the question was, or to gather a few of your thoughts. And as I say, these should be things that you've had some exposure to, which hopefully means that you'll be in a better position to use those other skills that you've been spoken about how to structure those questions. In terms of leadership and team working type questions, these are to me slightly less easy to guide you as to exactly what they are. They may be about how do you divide the workload. So you're working between a busy neonatal unit, and there's lots of things going on. How are you going to triage what needs to be done best? How do you make the best use of your clinical team? Sometimes the question is, everyone thinks that all the time we need to be training people. Every possibility we need to make sure people are getting an ability to do a skill. Well, I can tell you, if you've got a 27-week baby in front of you who hasn't got a secure airway, it may not be the baby to say to the F2, oh, do you want to have a little go at intubating, because we're all here to help. There might sometimes be that you have to say, actually, this is really important, I'm going to step in and do it. And a question may be devised that allows you to explain that actually I am the most senior person as the registrar, and this is something which I need to do. Sometimes it will be about recognizing that you need to ask for help. You need to be contacting your consultant and getting them to come in. No consultant should ever be offended by being asked to come in if they're on call. And sometimes it will just be about remembering S-bar type handovers, and that you recognize that communication and passing over of that information is vitally important. In terms of the academic question, I think you will not be given a paper and say, tell us what you think of this paper. Those days are gone. It's much more likely that you'll be asked to describe a QI project that you've been involved in, and what your involvement was, and how much you learned. And some of that may have been in your application form as well, but as I say, they're not going to have that in front of them. Sometimes the question might cover, how do we implement learning from research into neonatal units, which isn't always straightforward. having an understanding of the role that audits and PDSA cycles, and other quality improvement tools, how they work, having some knowledge about the use of journal clubs and your experience of journal clubs, both presenting at them and being part of them. When I was a junior, certainly if anyone went off to any of the conferences, it was expected that they would come back and do a session on what they'd learned at that. I'd be very surprised if you were asked to comment, say, on a paper, but also on a set of results from a paper. And I think Sarah had said, we might sometimes say, tell us about a paper you've recently read. Well, that's really complicated because as a group of assessors, we might not know what that paper is, so therefore we can't really score you on your answer to that. And again, unlikely to be anything on statistics. So sort of my final point, and then we'll have a time for questions. I think you've heard all these before, and I think they're really practical. Just have a drink somewhere near to hand. Have a pen and paper if you want to write some things down. And as Tommy said, dress like you're having an interview. That's respectful, and I think it puts you in the right frame of mind for it. If you want to do some Wonder Woman power standing, as Sarah said, so be it. Make sure you're in time. You don't want to be arriving late for any part of this. Make sure your internet's working. Make sure you're somewhere quiet. Have a think about what your background might be. I can't see my screen at the moment, but I know at this time of the day the sun streams in through the window behind me and sometimes look like I've got some golden halo on, so I have to change the background as the day goes on. If you didn't hear the question correctly, ask the panel to repeat it. Don't start rambling on something that you think you heard. And remember that actually, as a panel, we really want you to do well. There's nothing more depressing for us than someone who just really loses it and isn't able to answer the question. You're all extremely good and capable doctors, and we want you to do well in that. Sarah's already alluded to the fact that there is a time constraint. I think we are better now at saying this is your clinical question. It will be in 2 parts so that there's another bit coming, and we will interject at some point. But you also need to be aware that for each question, there's about a 6 or 7 minutes, and the team will have worked out between them who's going to get 6 and who's going to get 7 minutes on the question. So be succinct and try really, really hard not to ramble, because rambling also slightly takes you off piste. And if you can keep focused, it's much more likely that you're going to be hitting those positive indicators of what we want. And I think finally, just try and stay calm, which is really easy for me to say. But actually, the people who manage to stay calm and control themselves, as a rule, will come out of this process a little bit better. So that's all I had to say. I'll stop sharing those slides. Hopefully, if you weren't interested in what I was saying, you like the pictures. Okay.
That's fantastic, Paul. Thank you. We've already got one question in the chat for you, which is, could you please give more examples as to what might constitute a negative or a positive indicator there?
I think it slightly depends on the question. Let's say you had a clinical question. You were asked, you were crash called to labour ward, and 30-week babies delivered with unexpected gastroschisis. You might not have all been in that situation. A positive indicator would be that you stayed calm, you had your team around you, you allocated roles of what you wanted to do, and maybe you asked someone to go and get the consultant or let the consultant know, because this was an unexpected finding. And I don't know about the other people who are running this course, who are all very capable. I know that. I still think you'd probably let your consultant know that had happened if it was unexpected, because if it was expected, it might be that they're more likely to be around. So a negative indicator would be the person who sort of is rather brash about the whole thing. I can control this. I'm brilliant. I can get all of this. I don't need to call my consultant. I'll, be barking commands at people. Go and get me the cling film, or go and get me the silo, whatever it might be. So it's those sort of things that we're looking at in terms of positive and negative indicators. I don't know whether that's helpful, but it's such a broad that every question that we write. There's a scoring sheet that the assessors have, which has this is what we want to hear, and these are things that we're not particularly interested in hearing. I think if I'm being really honest, when I've written questions, I write questions and I have the model answer in front of me. And the negative indicators are more the absence of the things that we want to hear, rather than you've said something really awful, because mostly people don't say anything awful. But it's about being true to the question we've asked, and you can practice those things yourself. There's 3 babies get admitted at the same time to the neonatal unit. How do you manage that? Okay, well, have a little think. How am I going to do that? I'm asked to go and speak to parents on the postnatal ward because the midwives think the baby might have Down syndrome. How am I going to do that? They're not going to be difficult scenarios, but you will recognize after the event that there's a correct way to do that and there's an incorrect way to do it, and what we want you to be channeling is the correct way. So think about those things, and ask yourselves and ask one another those sort of questions.
Thank you. And there's one more I think we've probably got time for. Is it's on the theme of negative indicators. Are there any examples of patient safety concerns that would make you ineligible for further offer? So I think it's a question about, is there anything to any utter no-nos to avoid? Anything?
Well, I'm sure there will be. I've not seen any. If you score, obviously it's a combined score, so each individual score is important. Any scores of 1 or 2, the panel member has to explain why they've been given. There is a process at the end where sometimes the panel don't hear what you've said. And someone may say, well, they were talking about resuscitation of the baby and they went straight on to doing CPR and they didn't mention any inflation breaths or ventilation breaths. And someone else said, no, they definitely said we give 5 inflation breaths and then 30 seconds of ventilation. Oh, sorry, my mistake, I didn't hear it. So there is a process at the end of each day where we make sure we're weighing up and getting the correct answers. I've never been in a position where we've scored someone and said they are therefore ineligible, because we recognise that people are nervous on the day.
Fab. I think that's probably a reassurance, isn't it? That's fantastic, Paul. I'm sure there are many other things we could ask you about, but due to the pressure of time, I think we've got to move on. Thank you so much for joining us today. And then we're going to move on to hear from Chrysa, who's going to talk to us about an IMG perspective, because I'm aware that we've got lots of people applying from various levels of experience within UK medicine, and it is a UK-based assessment process. So really looking forward to
Can you hear me?
hearing.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. My camera has just started playing up. Is it?
There's a bit of echo.
Let me just.
While you do that, if I can ask Paul, thank you so much again. If I can ask you to email, if you're happy to share your presentation, if you can share it with Tommy, and then I'll put it on the Google Drive link that's on the chat for all participants to access at the end of the day. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, there is still a bit of echo, but yeah, we can see the presentation.
Okay, so now I need to fix the echo.
Yeah, there is some echo. Try, I don't know if you have a different device. Sarah, you wanted to say something. I saw your hand.
Hi, yeah, I just, before we go on to the IMG bit as well, I just thought it was probably worth mentioning the waiting room before you go into the interview, because this did catch me a little bit off guard, and I think if you just have an awareness about this. So before you go in, you'll come into like a virtual waiting room, and there will be a I don't know what they call themselves, but basically there'll be somebody in that waiting room that's nothing related to the CSAC. And mine was actually a medical student. So they're just a person that's there to kind of sort of direct the flow of traffic. Mine happened to be a medical student who wanted to get into pediatric training. And so she basically started asking me and talking to me all about my pediatric career and how I got into pediatric training, which was completely distracting and in some ways really, really good. But I was also very much of like, I just want to get in the headset of where I want to be. Now, I imagine that probably that was a bit rare and that won't happen, but it's just worth knowing that I can't even remember how long it was, maybe 5-10 minutes in the waiting room was almost like something else was happening too. I don't know if Tommy or Leah, you also had those experiences, but yeah, there will be an invigilator, I think is what they're called, there basically sort of helping and supporting and watching the rest of it, but they won't be an expert in anything. And they won't talk through your interview or get involved in your interview, but they may talk to you in that waiting room before.
Thank God mine was silent. That would have really
Yeah, I think
pissed me.
I just sort of sat awkwardly with mine, I think. So
I'm too
so-
kind. I'm too kind. I just went off on one, but yeah. Anyway, just so people are aware, there'll be.
lovely. I think so. Looks like you're ready to go.
Yes, are you guys okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Much better, Chrysa. Thank you.
Great,
So
thank you.
just a short introduction. Chrysa has already CCT'd, so she's at the end of the tunnel where everybody wants to go. She has a special interest in pediatric cardiology. She is certified and she is an amazing person and doctor. So thank you, Chrysa, for joining us.
Thank you, Leah. Thanks for asking me to come over. Well, yeah, I'm just gonna talk a little bit about the international medical graduate perspective, and that's primarily the reason I'm here. I graduated in Grace, and I came over to UK about 10 years ago. I got my pediatric training, and then I developed two passions, as Leah said, neonatology and pediatric cardiology, and I recently CCT'd. Starting off, I just wanted to say a big congratulations to all of you for getting your interviews. It's a big success. It shows your commitment. It shows your passion. So congratulations to all. So I'm just going to talk about two different things really in this presentation very briefly. The first one is a group of things that are different in the UK practice compared to everywhere else in the world, which I found quite interesting learning about when I was going through training, but also quite difficult as well. And then I'm gonna tell you a couple of tips on how to use your international experience in interviews, and then we're gonna close the presentation with not success stories as such, but what worked for me, if that's at all helpful. So I'm calling them traps, but really, as I said, there are different things that there's 6 things that are different in the UK practice compared to everywhere else in the world. And I've structured them around interview questions, so hopefully it's going to be interesting for non-IMGs as well. So the first one talks about reflection and reflective practice. You might find it in an interview question regarding a mistake. So instead of just saying, I made a mistake, I apologized about it, I'll promise never to do it again, just structure your question around your reflection. So say, I'm quite interested to know about what happened. You're going to gather data to understand why that happened, but most importantly, what you're going to do from now on, how are you going to engage your team. Always remember that effective practice is about being structured, action-orientated, documenting everything, and then engaging the whole team in the process. So that's definitely one of the points, the main point for me, the main difference between UK practice and everywhere else in the world. The second point is about escalation of concerns. I think Paul touched on this in his presentation as well. So when you have, at any point in your interviews, if a question comes about an intubation, for example, you can say, I can manage an intubation because I've intubated 1,000 times. And actually, as international medical graduates, some of us grew up or learned medicine in places where there's hierarchical systems. You might feel bad about calling a consultant 3 o'clock in the morning, but in the UK, it's an issue of probity and safety if you don't. When you answer such questions, it's good to think about the Swiss cheese model. Calling your consultant and escalating your concerns doesn't show weakness, shows that you have situational awareness, that you know that you know there's other things happening in the neonatal unit. There might be other babies that are quite sick. You might be expecting deliveries. So it is about being safe. The third point is about leadership, and again, also Paul touched on this. But so some of us might be coming from countries where there's the iron fist model in terms of leadership, but in the UK, as we all know, we talk about compassionate leadership. We talk about flattening the hierarchy. So instead of saying I told my juniors to do so and so and they did it, it will score you more points if you say, I am aware of human factors. I am aware that there's people around me in this team, and I want to hear what they say. I want to hear their concerns. I want to reply to this. So leadership is not about position. It's not even about technical competency. It is also about emotional intelligence, how you're engaging your team, how you're leading them. So make sure that you show this as well. Then moving on to the MDT. So again, a massive difference in my head elsewhere overseas compared to the UK. So your tongue might slip and say, I will tell the nurse to, and so on and so forth. But as you all know, the neonatal units in the UK are primarily nurse-led. Okay, it shows great respect towards the team if you think about this as well, and if you say, I would discuss with the senior nurse because I have concerns about what's happening in the unit. I would discuss with the bedside nurse to get her perspective, because she's been with the baby all day, so she knows what's happening. So disrespecting that is a red flag. And then when we another quite new thing that comes into practice, and it's actually embedded in the neonatal UK practice, is family integrated care and shared decision making. It is about the role of the parents when we in any clinical scenario, really. And we might be coming from countries where there's the paternalistic model where the doctor says what thinks needs to happen and the parents nod, but obviously the UK practice is completely different. When it comes to parents, always think about family integrated care. Parents are not visitors, they're part of the team. It's quite nice to say, I explored the parents' views, we agreed on the plan together, and these things might come into palliative care scenarios or difficult decision scenarios. So talk about parallel planning, talk about parental wishes when these questions come. And the last thing in that section is duty of candor. Again, it's a statutory duty in the UK to inform the parents, inform the family when a mistake happens, and that might be different in the countries that you're coming from. So when mistakes happen, or when you have a misdiagnosis scenario, talk about it. Say that I would follow duty of candor. I would explain what happened. Some units even use written communication with parents when they have to do this. So that's the first part of the presentation. The next part is about using your international experience in your interviews and how you can do this. In the why neonates question, make it personal. You're probably coming from a country where you've had some really strong experiences. You've got really good technical skills. So use that. What has motivated you to go into neonates? Have you seen any preventable mortality overseas? Has that driven your passion? Use this experience. Use experiences like source limitations and what that does to neonatal outcomes. That will make you stand out from other candidates potentially. And when you talk about your experience, think about your adaptability, your resilience, your clinical maturity. So you've come from overseas, you've come from different areas of the world. That shows that you're resilient and you're adaptive as well. Yeah, but obviously the same goes for non-IMGs as well. When you've changed many different units, showing resilience and adaptability and how that helps you in your career is quite good. And then going back to technical skills, you as IMGs, you might have had exposure to lots and lots of clinical procedures. You might have done this intubation 1,000 times, but it will be a trap if you sound overconfident. You might give the panel the impression that you might not be safe. So instead of just saying, I've done this 1,000 times, I know how to do it, say, I've done this 1,000 times, but I've escalated to my consultant. I am aware of human factors, so I know what's happening around me. I'm going to use the units checklist for this. And then when it comes to culture competency, it's difficult in terms of communication. Communication stations probably scares as IMGs a lot, but we do have some advantages as well. We are talking into it, so we know that people can communicate in different languages. We know there's cultural differences between people, and that makes us puts us in an ideal situation to listen, to look for non-verbal cues, to check understanding, and all these are extra points that you can gain when you talk about your cultural competency. And then at the end, the final point is about QAs and clinical governance. You might have done something in your country that it's not quite a QI project, but you might have followed the steps. So explain what you did using terminology using QI terminology, and that will show your passion about clinical governance. And then in terms of success stories, I hope I'm not overrun. No. So in terms of success stories, I think I found it very difficult always, because when you've gone through the process and you're successful, giving tips, it's a different perspective, isn't it? But what I did and worked was I talked to my camera for hours. It's quite hilarious for me to look at these pictures and these videos now, but it was so helpful because it just gave me good points to change. And what also gave me good points to change was mock interviews. I had mock interviews before my formal interviews, and in my mock interviews, they literally butchered me. It was very brutal, but it gave me the jolt that I needed to sort of change my mindset, and hopefully at the end I was successful. On the day, as Paul also said, force yourself to take breaths and don't rush into things. What helped me was to write things down as the interviewers were asking questions, and then quickly read what I wrote before answering. It's literally this few seconds that will slow your heart rate down, slow your breath down, and slow your thoughts down. Also, sleep well, wear your lucky shirt, do things that make you feel good. Make it personal. It's your time to shine. Use your experience. Even use your fears and your failures. I mean, neonatal life is full of fear and failures. Reflecting on this shows your passion, shows that you truly want to do it. And finally, I just looking back into that experience, what I see is that I've learned a lot, both about neonatology and about myself. I'm not going to go through resources because obviously you've got 1,000 of those, but if you want the presentation, they're all there. Thank you very much for listening to me, and that's my email if anyone wants to contact me for any reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Chrysa. That was brilliant. We're gonna wait if there are any questions from the audience, or if anybody wants to just write a question in the chat and or raise your hands. Cool. We are on time, which is always great for such study days. So thank you everyone for keeping it sweet and short. I can't see any questions, so we can move on if you like. So before going to the breakout rooms, I think it's going to be Sarah, Tommy, and me. Tommy's doing his magic, and he will divide us in groups. But before that, I would like to tell you a few things about the actual questions. So I'm going to share with you a few questions, and then you can practice in the groups. Also, have a look at the link I've put in the chat. That's a Drive, Google Drive link. I hope you can access it. Just let me know if you can't. I've already put the presentations you heard today, and I've put some questions there, and I've put my presentation that I will share with you now as well. And again, I think it's important to have a bank of questions to practice in your own time. So let me see if you can see my presentation now. So I can't see you, so just somebody, if you can shout, if you can see the slides moving.
We can see.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so while Tommy prepares for that, I'm just going to go through the slides to give you some more piece of advice and some actual sample questions for you to practice. So I think the interview dates are in a few weeks' time, so you have plenty of time. These are just the last year recruitment posts, and obviously we know neonatology is competitive, but I think you'll be fine. And the purpose of preparing and the key to preparation is actually doing what you're doing right now. The useful resources that Sarah shared already with you. This is from the RCPCH. A few nice podcasts if you have time, and obviously the courses that Tessa is leading. But some general advice from my point of view is always practice your questions out loud and keep your 4-minute marks. I like to keep my 4-minute because then I set an alarm every time I ask, I start the question. And then when the alarm beeps, I know that's when I need to summarize. So I know that I always can keep on time, and that really helped me on the day. I was able to do an opening line, a main answer, and a summary for all my questions. And I was able to not run out of time. I was able to tell them exactly what I wanted for every question. I agree with everybody that says write the question down, and also write the structure of your answer down so that you know what you're going to talk about. Be systematic, be to the point. When you're answering clinical questions, don't forget, you will not get all marks if you just say, I'm going to talk about A, B, C, D, E. You have to actually talk about A, B, C, D, E. You have to talk about airway. You have to talk about breathing. So you have to actually give information about all of these components, and not just say, I'm going to do an A to E assessment. Be aware of the 2-part questions, as the previous speaker said. Be smart and use keywords, adjust them to fit the question. Join groups if you're a person that likes that, or mock interviews with other people like your peers who might have done that last year. And as I said, keep to your structure. This is the scoring. So Paul touched upon that a bit. So that's the overall scoring out of 80, but then on Oriel, you will get a scoring percentage out of 100. And if you get 80% and above, you're definitely getting a post. So these are the domains. As you know, I will give you top 10 questions for each domain. And then you can also practice in your groups. So these are questions I've selected throughout my preparation. And obviously, the first for career motivation is exactly the same question, but is asked in a different way and is phrased in a different way. And that's not to trick you, but rather to make you think about how you can answer the question. So I think the best way to answer this question is obviously expect it, and you are expecting it. Write it down. I mean, you already know what are your traits. Just write them down so that you can have a flow in your answer. Make sure to make it personal and answer the question of what makes you a good neonatologist. How do you fit the job? You can use your camp structure that we mentioned earlier, and try to make this answer a perfect answer, because that's your first question. That's where all your stress will come in. And the better you prepare this question, I felt that you will, like, it's going to be like your easy question. So just, make sure you nail it, and then you get so much boost of confidence that then the rest of the questions will just be fine. So example again of how to do that in preparation is write down all your domains, write down small notes of what you've done on each domain, and then pick a few things, because obviously you won't be able to elaborate on everything, but pick a few things to justify your answer. Now, the tricky ones that I found hard answering, and many people found hard to answer, and I believe in order to get the best points, you need to be able to comment and expand on each of these, are a few things about the future of neonatology and the challenges of neonatology. And you might be asked that in the first question, or it might be like blended in your last question. So just be mindful of these two things. And for me, you need to be aware of how you look at the big picture of the specialty and how it stands in 2026. So be mindful of the changing population, the extreme preterms, high-risk pregnancy, and what does that mean, and the whole involvement of fetal medicine into neonatology, the shortening of training, the challenges in research, the workforce stress for the NHS, all the national maternity reviews that are happening, the emotional burdens post-COVID and post-Brexit, ethical dilemmas, and sustainability. So you still have time to look into these 10 points and try to get an opinion on each one of them. And then you can feed your comments and answers to any question to make it stronger and to make your answer stand out. Some useful reading. So I think these are all like recent papers I'll put on here, and you can access them through the PPT. So these are reports and papers that every neonatologist should read about. And the first one is about the future of neonatology, a very nice paper. You can see some very powerful names, and they're very popular. You can see Nina Mondi for those who know from Imperial and so on. So this is about where neonatology is going. Should neonatology be a different specialty? How training is going to be formed, and where does it stand in the world, like in the global spectrum of things. And again, you don't need to read the whole thing, but you just need to have an opinion about it. This is about resuscitating 21-weekers, and obviously we don't really see that in the UK, but this is from the Iowa team, and you need to know that Iowa does that, and you need to be aware that this is happening somewhere else in the world, and you need to have an opinion on it in my eyes to become a good neonatologist in the future. And the more you show awareness that this is happening, and the more you know about this topic, is going to give you more points, and the more you can feed in those things in your answer shows that you're one step ahead. These are all the reports from reviews that are happening, and you know about Okenen and Kirpen and the Baroness Amos reports that was recently published in December. So again, showing your situational awareness of actually what's happening in the neonatal world right now, internationally, but also nationally. The second part is about clinical questions. So these are like top 10 questions I could find throughout the years. As Paul said, these are things that you have already seen. Even if you haven't worked in surgical centers yet, you might know about surgical conditions. And if that's your weak point, you can just dig into a little bit more into that and find about like surgical things in neonatology. If you haven't worked in cardiac centers, again, just try to, touch upon each one of these questions to formulate a possible answer. So my key things to answer the clinical questions: make sure you understand the question that is asked. Always start with an opening line. So this will give you a few more seconds to think. You can say, for example, I've been in a very similar situation in the past, and what I always try to do is to approach it from this and this and this perspective. So, just pause, write down your answer, and then start with an opening line. Always mention patient safety and preparation. Mention about your team, your department, your systems. So start by grouping things together. When you go to your clinical element, always do your ABCD thoroughly. Do not just mention A to E assessment. Then is your aftermath. So every single opportunity is an opportunity for teaching, learning, hot debrief, cold debrief, presentation in M&Ms. So every single answer you provide needs to have these things in the end. Shows your ability to summarize things nicely, make it everything about learning about the team and what do you take out of this case after this case has finished. An example is this case. You can see how I formed my answer, and we can do some more like practice question. This is, again, starting with patient safety and preparation, mentioning about your team, mentioning about your department, mentioning about your systems. Do you need to transfer the baby out? Do you need to do the referrals to surgical centers? The clinical elements, so what do you focus on when you're admitted a preterm baby, for example, and then the aftermath. So exactly what I mentioned before. Another example for perinatal hypoxia, again, patient safety, so your opening line, your clinical element, really thoroughly going from A to E, and then about your team, your department, your system, and your aftermath. There are plenty of frameworks for practice, as Sarah said, and this is the link to all of the BAPAM ones. You don't need to read all of them, but most of them are really useful in answering questions. The HIE one is very nice. The prematurity one is very nice. The pain one is very nice. So a lot of things are there, and they will help you formulate your answer better. You all know this, and if you don't know, you should know it for your interview. You don't need to know your stats, but you need to know that you'll refer to it if you need it. That's particularly for your questions asking you about antenatal counseling, or about attending a delivery, an unexpected like preterm delivery, or about how you risk stratify your babies based on gestational age in terms of, for example, giving parents a prognostication factor of how the baby is going to do in the unit. So this is all very useful resources you need to be aware of. This is about setting up your mind between life-sustaining treatment and for comfort-focused care. And again, that's might be harder questions to answer, might be questions you'll be asked when you're down to your consultant job. But you need to know there are different ways to approach cases, and you need to know a little bit about that part. And it might be hard to ask you, what happens in a scenario that parents wish to have palliative care. And these resources from BAPAM are really helpful because it really tells you everything you need to know about this topic. And have a read through it and try to elaborate and formulate your answer if you're asked that question. Then a few tricky ones, I think, again, you need to be able to comment, are the ones that there are a few debates on, let's say, or that people don't have decided what is best or not best to do in neonatology. And there are many of things in neonatology that we don't know if they're actually good doing or not good doing. And I've put a few here, but also a few resources for you to check. There's a very nice publication, very recent, about closing or not closing the PDA, a few things about antenatal steroids, postnatal steroids, probiotics that was recently published for the UK. So you can see a lot of resources there about, let's say, debatable topics, or actually topics that some units follow that pathway, some units don't follow that pathway. So again, just to have an opinion on that. Third domain, about academic understanding and ability. Again, my top 10 questions are here for you to practice. And just a few tips. Read about the basics. You need to know what research is. You need to know what QIP is. You need to differentiate between those two. Find an example about each. So, for example, you need to perfect your answer about your audit, the audit that you designed. You need to perfectly answer about your quality improvement project. Even if you haven't led a research project, or if you don't have a PhD, you need to know what research is. You need to tell them about GCP competencies. You need to tell them, for example, you're doing like PI work, or you've done training for associate PI. So you need to know the basics and make it personal as to what you are doing to expand your skills on that domain. As Sarah said, pick a research paper that changed your practice, and try to have that in mind. Again, even if they don't ask you that particular question, you can actually feed it in your third domain question. Read about how you set up a service within the NHS. That's useful, especially for trainees who don't are not very experienced with the NHS yet. Try to see, this is a very good PDF document. It's huge, but try to keep the titles in your head about how to set up a service. And even if the question sounds generic, you still need to try and give an example. And that's my advice for every question. Very useful thing that Tessa Davis shared is the 7 pillars to clinical governance, and that's the PIRATES mnemonic. So P for patient public involvement, I for information IT, R for risk management, A for audit, T for training and education, E for evidence-based medicine, and S for staff management. And then if you can actually mention that in your domain 3 question, I think you will get more points, because the interviewers will understand that you know what that is, and you can tell them, for example, I know there are the 7 pillars and I will touch upon those 3. So then again, you have your opening line, you give them a hint that you know what these are, and then you elaborate on 3. Example of a question that is very, very hard to answer, I think, is how do you set up a new service? That's the notes that I took. I'm happy for you to see them and expand on them. I think this question is tricky, and if you haven't practiced it, it's really hard to answer on the day. So these are questions that I would suggest you write the answers down. I based my answer on 4 principles from that NHS document I show you, and that's capacity, risk, quality, and flow. And I try to find an example for each one of them. Other tricky questions are, what are the biggest problems in neonatology, the barriers to doing trials and to recruiting, and metrics to measure quality of care? Again, I feel that these are questions you have to have prepared. You can't really think on the spot on the day, but these are now, very well-known circulated questions. So I'm sure you will all have practice or will practice answering them. To give you a few hints as to where you might find answers, the BAPM NSQI report is very, very helpful. It is on the BAPM QI resources. There is a lot of things you can take from that and formulate a model answer, let's say. You can find that on the internet. It's free, and I suggest you have a look at that. Regarding service quality indicators, a few things you can elaborate on your answers are shown here, and I've put the link as well. It's again from the BAPM team. Other useful reading, as other people said, I've included here for your information. The last one is about MDT. Again, these are the top 10 questions that I could gather throughout my preparation. Think about long-term planning, and think about your team planning and team usefulness of your team. Again, read about the basics. Remember, what comes with long-term conditions is not about how you will discharge the baby, but how the baby will cope in the community. So think about the whole setup of community, like physio, speech and language, child developmental centers, community pediatricians, blah, 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 all the referrals you need to do, following up, seeing the baby again, all of these things that, come along with discharge planning. Include the MDT and try to elaborate on each person's role. Show that's your best time to show your elements of leadership and management, organization, thinking ahead, and how do you support the parents, the staff, and the wider team. Here's an example I used here that's particularly for deaths and incidents. Again, these are tricky questions for reporting and managing neonatal death. And these are questions most likely asked at consultant level, but the more you prepare about the hard questions, the easier the easy questions are. Another example here is an example I really, really like is about home oxygen. Again, you might be asked this question. There's a lot to cover and people don't really grasp the extent of planning that needs to happen for home oxygen to be set up. So you can just see this answer there or add a few points of your own. Tricky ones about this category are the centralization of services, feedback about your service, feedback about your training, or why do we need more neonatologists after all? So try and have an answer, a comment on each one of those. Again, these are tricky to answer, and if you haven't thought of them, might throw you off on the day. A useful reading also added here with some links for you to access, and overall keep practicing. You have plenty of time. Time yourself. I recommend 4 minutes, and when the alarm goes off, that's your time to summarize, and your summary is only 1 line. Use an opening line always, show your structure, and then a concluding line. And the questions you think are hard and challenging, try to be prepared and write them down in advance and practice them often so that you are more prepared on the day. That's it. I hope you found that useful.